Since leaving the local church, or being a former pastor, I guess as Dan introduced me, whenever I run into people from a former church, aka all you all, I'm usually asked the same set of questions. I was like thinking of printing up cards just to hand out when I was asked the question. But how's the family? Do you like your job? What do you miss about the local church? The family's fine. I like my job. What do I miss about the local church? Well, there are some things I definitely do not miss. Charge conference, I do not miss. But there are more things I do miss. I miss the sense of community. When my family and I left here, we had to, for the first time in my life, find my own church. Looking at some of my colleagues who have found themselves in the same place. Growing up, my parents decided where I went to church. When I graduated from college, the bishop decided where I'd go to church. And so it's a daunting exercise. And I have a deep appreciation for people seeking a new church because it's hard. I also miss presiding over the sacraments and preaching regularly. Although not lately, because I preached the fourth Sunday of Advent at a church. I got to preach Christmas Eve, and then here I am today, get to preach and do the sacrament, 2 off my bucket list. Christmas Eve was interesting. I was in a little church near here, and I had some competition. There was a toddler in the service, and it was his first time in worship, and he decided that he wanted to preach at the same time that I was asked to preach. Now, after the service, the family came up to me. They're very apologetic. We're so sorry our child made noise. And I said, that's what kids do. They make noise. And I had the microphone, so I will always be louder. And those who know me, even without the microphone, I can sometimes always be louder. And then I said to them that there is something special about the noise of children in church. In my very first church, so long ago, there was absolutely 0 children. There were no children. And I said to the family, the sound of the silence was deafening. But the more I thought about that, really, the sound of the silence was the sound of hopelessness. The presence of children is redemptive. Not only did Jesus welcome the children, not only does Jesus welcome the child in all of us, miraculously, Jesus came into this world as a child. And so often we want to just gloss over that and jump to grown-up Jesus. I don't know, maybe a reference to Talladega Nights would be good here, but we won't go there with the Christmas baby Jesus. But if you know, you know. I mean, just think about it. Midnight feedings. And learning to walk and learning to talk and tantrums. Can you imagine Jesus throwing a tantrum? That could be dangerous. But there's wisdom in the openness of a child, an insight into its vulnerability. A child must trust us and rely on our fidelity. A child teaches us to forgive and to ask for forgiveness. A child seals and expresses our love and commitment. A child shows us how to play again and how to laugh again and how to love unconditionally again. And I'm continually reminded throughout this season of the words of Isaiah 11:6, and a little child will lead them. And then Isaiah 60, verse 1, arise, shine, your light has come, the Lord's glory has shone upon you. Isaiah dreamed dreams for the child Israel. He reminded them that your light is here. The glory of God is here. No matter what darkness covers our earth, no matter how thick the clouds in your life may be, there is a hidden glory shining hope. Children offer us hope. That's kind of at the center of both of our readings this morning. The Magi, having seen the star, began to seek the Christ child. And I really believe they were seeking hope. But who were these guys? I mean, who were they that they would travel so far to find a child? Now, if I'm bursting bubbles, I'm sorry. You'll get over it. Regardless of what the song says, they were not kings. That's kind of part of the mythology that we made up a couple of hundred years ago just to make them look better. It's not in the Scripture. It's also not in the Scripture that there was 3 of them, or that they were even wise. I mean, they had to stop and ask Herod for directions. So who were they? Well, when you dig into some of the original language, the rare, obscure word that Matthew uses, and Matthew is the only gospel that mentions the Magi, the word that Matthew uses isn't the word for wise men, it isn't the word for king, it is the word for Magi, which is also the root of our word magician. And that kind of gives us the only clue into who they were and what they did. Magi were usually fortune tellers in those days. They were soothsayers. They were astrologers. They were the interpreters of dreams. They came from the region of Persia, and the Magi order in that region actually allowed women to join their ranks. And so, contrary to our image today of 3 men riding in on camels, there's a better than average chance that among the caravan were women who were not just in support roles, but who were actually some of the Magi. All right, so what do we know so far? They weren't kings, they weren't wise, and they weren't all men. Check. And they couldn't have been the only ones to have seen the star that night. I mean, it's described as some massive celestial event. I mean, there are some who believe that it was Halley's Comet. They've done math, I guess. I don't know. I'm a pastor. We don't do math. But they believe that Halley's Comet was around about that time. Others believe it was an exploding supernova. Still others believe it was the convergence of Jupiter and Saturn. But whatever it was, what we do know is only a handful of Magi actually made the journey across the desert to that tiny little southern town in southern Judah. It just makes me think, others saw the event, but only these ones were wise enough to follow. It made me think, if the star was all that big and all that obvious, why did some pack their bags and go while others just stayed in the comfort of their homes? What were they seeking? What motivated them to get up and get moving? It's really at the heart of the celebration of Epiphany. Epiphany is actually tomorrow. It is the last day of Christmas, so you are allowed to listen to Christmas music until tomorrow. I do. It's all good. Decorations are still up at the house. And Epiphany marks the celebration of light breaking into the darkness. And the story of the Magi is actually a story of seeking. It's a story of God's promise revealed. It is ultimately a story of hope. But long before the Magi set out on their journey, the people of Israel who were living in exile were also holding on to the hope that they heard in the words from Jeremiah. Jeremiah, who reminded them that even in foreign lands, God's plan for them remains secure. And what these two stories have in common is that both begin in darkness. The Magi's search begins when light pierced the darkness of the night, and they didn't know the ultimate destination, but they faithfully followed anyway. In Jeremiah's time, the Israelites found themselves living in the darkness of exile, and they were tempted to lose hope. But God's message through Jeremiah was clear. Seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile. When 70 years are completed, I will bring you back to this place. Like them, sometimes our stories begin in darkness. They begin in places of uncertainty and grief and longing, and we too are seeking guidance. We too may need to plant the seeds of hope in unfamiliar and challenging places. I mean, there are some things I just love about the Magi. I love that the Magi weren't Israelites, that they were outsiders, that they were foreigners, yet they were still drawn to God. It's reminiscent of the words in Jeremiah 29:13, "You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart." I love that God's grace extends beyond the boundaries that we try to set. I mean, we may not have all the answers, but our willingness to seek, our willingness to ask questions, to move forward, opens us to the presence of God. Our willingness to trust and seek, that we can find strength. Strength that we can find in God's promise to the Israelites in Jeremiah 29:11. "For I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future." I love that after encountering Jesus, the Magi go home by a different way, reminding us how our encounters with Jesus can transform our lives and make us different, leading us in new directions towards forgiveness, towards love, and towards hope. And like the ancient Israelites, like the Magi, people in our world are desperately seeking hope. As we enter 2025, there is a palpable global yearning for hope, driven by recent challenges and a collective desire for a brighter future. It's because hope seems to be draining away for so many in our country. One recent analysis found that 44% of 8th, 10th, and 12th grade students reported feeling that their lives were not useful. 44% feel that their lives are not useful. And half of that group added, "I do not enjoy life." That's hopelessness. Many sense the death of hope in our political world, in our religious life, in a society that more often than not disagrees with one another. This gives us a sense that the future is bleak, and if there is no future, there is no hope. I think that's why God promises a future of hope and promises just future. But that lack of hope, that lack of a feeling of a future leads to anxiety and depression, fear and conflict, anger and distrust, grief and despair. But the good news is that in the midst of all of this, we have a wonderful opportunity and challenge to share hope with others. On Epiphany, we can have an epiphany. We can have a sudden realization and some insight or a revelation. We can have that moment of clarity, which reminds us that the Jesus who was present for the Magi is the same Jesus who is present in our world and in our community, in our very lives. We just need to seek him like the Magi. We are called to point others to him like the star. Another epiphany, another moment of clarity I believe we're called to have was described to me by a friend and colleague, Reverend Michael Beck from the Florida Annual Conference. He said that we need to differentiate between hope and optimism because we use those words and ideas interchangeably, but they're very different. Optimism is grounded in the expectation that things will just get better. We don't know why, we just believe that improvement is possible. We believe that things will just eventually work out one way or another. But on the other hand, hope is much deeper. Hope is grounded in God's own being. And it's not a naive belief that everything will turn out the way we want it. It's the promise that God is with us regardless of how things turn out. Biblical hope is not wishful thinking. It's an assurance that God is empathetic to our human condition because God went through our human condition in Jesus. And it's also a promise that God is present, particularly when things seem to be spinning out of control. Hope is seeing Jesus everywhere and being Jesus wherever you are. Jesus is as near as your neighbor and is as far as a distant cosmos of the universe. Jesus is holding on to the hurting. He is feeding the hungry. He is comforting the afflicted and afflicting the comfortable. Jesus is as near as our hands and our eyes and our hearts with which we serve others. So if you really want to share hope this year, and I think we should, but if you really want to share hope this year, here's some things you can do. You can listen well to others. And not just listen to respond, but listen to understand what they're saying. Listen to their words and their hearts without judgment. You don't have to agree with them. Just hear them. If you want to share hope, take the fears of others seriously. They may seem unfounded to you, but to them, they're very real. If you want to share hope, take responsibility that if you can influence the factors that cause hopelessness in another person's life, then do it. Show them how your faith produces hope. If you want to share hope, then show compassion. Hope is an active process. So serve others, seek justice, work for peace. If you want to share hope, start your day with a serenity prayer. In the recovery community, that's a central prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I start each and every morning with this prayer. It's hung over my dresser because so much of our hopelessness is grounded in the fact that we focus on things we can't control. So how would it change if we could focus on those things that we could control? And so much of this past year, maybe this past 5 years, I don't know, has been marked by significant difficulties. Ongoing conflicts, economic uncertainties, environmental concerns. Even in his New Year's message, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres acknowledged that hope has been hard to find. Pope Francis declared 2025 as a year of Jubilee, using the theme Pilgrims of Hope, calling on all Roman Catholics to be those pilgrims of hope and engage in acts of kindness and solidarity. So as we stand at the beginning of this new year, the words of the reading of the Magi, the words of the prophet Jeremiah offer us a guiding light. Whether we're seeking like the Magi or feeling exiled like the Israelites, God's promise is the same. If you seek me, you will find me. May we step into this new year with the assurance that God's plans are filled with hope. And as we seek Christ, may His light lead us forward, shaping our lives and transforming our hearts.